Tell you what, it's 4 o'clock now and we have a quorum. So why don't we go ahead? We will start the meeting. I'll call this meeting to order. Madam City Clerk, could you do a roll call, please?
Of course, and it looks like Mr. Rogers is here.
Yep.
Mayor Schwedhelm.
Here.
Councilmember Dowd.
Here.
Councilmember Rogers.
Here.
Let the record show that all members are present.
Great. Couple housekeeping. Council members, please keep your audio on mute unless you're speaking. Staff will remain muted until needing to speak. As members of the public join the meeting, you'll be participating as an attendee. Your microphone and camera will be muted. Only today's panelists will be viewed during the meeting. If you're calling in from a telephone and choose to speak during the public comment portion of today's agenda, for privacy concerns, the host will be renaming your viewable phone number to resident and the last 4 digits of your phone number. And again, the City of Santa Rosa is committed to creating a safe and inclusive environment free from disruption, will not tolerate any hateful speech or actions that are well staffed to monitor that everyone is participating respectfully or they'll be removed. If necessary, we'll also immediately end the meeting. Not anticipating that, but just wanted to share that with everyone. Madam Clerk, could you please explain how public comments will be heard at today's meeting?
Of course. At each agenda item, the item is presented. The mayor will ask for subcommittee member comments and then open it up for public comment. The host in Zoom will be lowering all hands until public comment is open for the agenda item. Once the mayor has called for public comment, the mayor will announce for the public to raise their hand if they wish to speak on the specific agenda item. If you are calling in to listen to the meeting audibly, you can dial *9 to raise your hand. The host will then call on the public who have raised their hands. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes and a timer will appear on the screen for the council and public to see. Once all live public comments have been heard, the meeting host will read email public comments. If you provide a live public comment on an agenda item, but also submitted an email, your email public comment will not be read during the meeting. Additionally, there is 1 public comment period on today's agenda to speak on non-agenda matters, item 4. This is the time when any person may address the subcommittee on matters not listed on this agenda, but are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the subcommittee.
Great, thank you for that. On to item 3, approval of minutes. Mr. Dowd or Rogers, did you get a chance to take a look at the July 28th draft minutes? And if so, are there any corrections, additions, or any other changes?
Yeah, no corrections.
Likewise, no corrections.
All right, we'll accept those as submitted. All right, item 4, public comment on non-agenda matters. So we're now taking public comment on non-agenda matters. This is the time when any person may address the subcommittee on matters not listed on this agenda, but which are within the subject matter jurisdiction of the subcommittee. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Madam Clerk, would you please facilitate the public comment portion of item 4?
Of course. A countdown timer will appear for the convenience of the speaker and viewers. The first speaker will be acknowledged and invited to speak. Please make sure to unmute yourself when you are invited to do so. Your microphone will be muted at the end of that countdown or at the conclusion of your comment. Our first speaker will be Emily Rainey, followed by Martin Kupferman. Emily, I have enabled your speaking permissions. If you can unmute yourself.
Great, I'm unmuted. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can. Let me just pull up the timer. 1 moment, please.
Okay.
Bear with me here. Can you see the timer on your screen?
I sure can.
Perfect. You'll have 3 minutes. Please identify yourself for the record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Thank you so much, committee members. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I work for a company called Y Green Energy Fund. That's the word energy spelled backwards. We are a local Sonoma County PACE company. We serve all of California, among other states, and we are the leading residential and commercial PACE provider. Very interested in serving Santa Rosa. We have not yet been approved in the city. We have been approved with the county's Skype PACE program through the Collaborative Services Agreement, which is a requirement for all private administrators in 2015. And so we've been trying to get into Santa Rosa ever since. I've had several conversations with staff, city manager staff, along with the city manager. Of course, COVID slowed things down quite a bit with our program review internally, but I'm really here just to remind folks of the importance of this program, particularly around our ability to serve the small commercial sector, which currently doesn't have much choice or competition from the other private PACE administrators that have been approved by the city. We offer a refinance program, which helps give capital to property owners who have completed PACE eligible projects previously, which is so important in these times where many companies are becoming illiquid. And so just as a reminder, the process for approving our program, or certainly getting it on an agenda to consider, is very simple. We have a set resolution template and a set staff report template, along with our JPA agreement, which is standard to the other PACE administrators that the city has already approved. So the process is pretty consistent with what has already been done by City Council in years past. And as a local Sonoma County company, we would be thrilled to serve the constituents in Santa Rosa. Obviously, with fire resiliency being top of mind, PSPS resiliency being top of mind, our PACE program can help both the residential sector, but as I said, the small, medium commercial sector, which so direly needs support for the power safety shutoffs that occur and really damage local economies. We certainly saw that in the last couple of years here. I'm a Sonoma County resident. I'm very proud to have worked in the city of Santa Rosa, where our company was originally founded and headquartered for many years. Now we reside in Petaluma, although most of us are all virtual during the stage. So again, thank you so much for hearing me out. I am very happy to answer questions offline and love that the subcommittee meets on such important topics. I'll say the first topic as well is very relevant to PACE, because of course PACE can help finance microgrids. So thanks so much for your time and look forward to next steps.
Our next public comment will be from Martin, followed by Kevin. Martin, I have enabled your speaking permissions. If you can unmute your microphone.
Yes, I have. Hi, I appreciate the opportunity to address the subcommittee. I'm Martin Kupferman. I'm a member of the Climate Reality Project. The Electric Vehicle Subcommittee, or the Electric Vehicle Squad, as we call it. Climate Reality has about 1,000 members in the Bay Area, and our squad is vitally concerned with electric vehicles and their adoption broadly throughout the state and our county. One of the key issues surrounding this has to do with the availability of charging stations. And they're unfortunately not as prolific and available as they might be. With that in mind, the state of California passed a law called AB 1236 in 2015, which asks municipalities to streamline the process of permitting electric vehicle charging stations. That law provides for such things as checklists that are publicly available, provides for administrative approval of charging stations with regard only for health and safety, provides a number of other provisions which will allow both private and public operators to feel comfortable and confident that they can go forth with charging stations. Our information is that the city of Santa Rosa is not yet in compliance with that law, according to the state of California. And it's important for our group, and our mission is to help the city in any way we can. Also, the state of California, through GoBiz, has a number of people, a number of staff members who stand ready to assist the city of Santa Rosa in adopting the provisions of AB 1236. And we hope, and I would greatly appreciate understanding how we might pursue that, or whom we might talk with at the city level. Lastly, we'd also urge the city of Santa Rosa to, if it has not already, to adopt and to provide for the purchase of electric vehicles wherever possible. Like private citizens who do so, we feel confident that over the longer term, that the cost savings involved in electric vehicles will repay some of the upfront costs. And those of you who may have seen in the New York Times a report recently that the cost of batteries and cost of operating electric vehicles is plummeting rapidly, to the point where in a couple of years they will be equivalent to the internal combustion engine. However, nothing will happen until, or not enough will happen until we have more EV charging stations. So I urge the city of Santa Rosa to adopt and comply with AB 1236.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Kevin Conway. Kevin, I have unmuted your microphone. Please confirm that we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
I can. Do you see the timer on your screen?
I do.
Perfect. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Conway in Santa Rosa. I appreciate the opportunity to comment today. The message I'm conveying is on behalf of the Coalition Opposing New Gas Stations, ConGas. ConGas is a Sonoma County-wide grassroots organization with a mission to stop the construction of new gas stations in Sonoma County and its 9 cities. ConGas requests that the subcommittee agendize at its next meeting consideration of an ordinance that would impose new rules regarding the new gas station permit applications. A set of ordinance policy elements has been prepared by ConGas, and that document can be shared with the subcommittee immediately. ConGas would like to know if the subcommittee is amenable to this request, and if so, offers its assistance in whatever ways may be helpful to the subcommittee. ConGas also respectfully requests a reply to this request. You could please reply by just letting us know now at this meeting, and if that's not possible, to send a reply to congas.contact@gmail.com. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next public comment will be from Jenny Blaker. Jenny, I have enabled your speaking permissions.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
I can. Please confirm if you can see the timer on your screen.
I can. Thank you. Yes,
Perfect.
thank you. Yes, my name is Jenny Blaker, and I'm also with ConGas, Coalition Opposing New Gas Stations. We are, as you may know, opposing a number of gas stations that are in the works at the moment, including 3 in the city of Santa Rosa. We think it would really make a lot of sense to have an ordinance that restricts any new gas stations in the city of Santa Rosa. We have prepared a document that would help with this, and I just wanted to thank Kevin and support his request, and to follow up and to put this on the agenda for your next meeting, if you would be able to consider that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor, I see no further hands, and we have no further email public comments.
Great, thank you for that. All right, on to item 5, 5.1. Amy Nicholson, are you going to be introducing this item?
Yes, I will be.
You're on.
Okay, great. Item 5.1, microgrid feasibility study, energy audit, and renewable energy and storage. And Doug Williams will be presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor Schwedhelm, council members. My name is Doug Williams. I'm the Facility Maintenance and Operations Coordinator. We have a couple of slides for you about the microgrid feasibility energy audit, renewable energy and storage proposal. We put out an RFP and we are currently looking at some of the proposals right now. Next slide, please. On January 28, 2020, City Council directed city staff to pursue an energy audit to curb carbon emissions. The Transportation and Public Works Department issued a request for proposals for an energy audit, renewable energy and storage recommendations, and microgrid feasibility on August 6, 2020. We've received 7 proposals. Next slide, please. The consultant will explain, and this is for the energy audit portion of this request for proposal. The consultant will explain existing conditions and recommended changes, including equipment specs and specific locations of all installations. How the measure will save energy and how much energy it will save. Financial analysis results, including cost of recommended measures, effects on maintenance and comfort, funding and grant opportunities. Next slide, please. At specified facilities located in the city of Santa Rosa, they will conduct inspections in order to identify site-specific energy-related deficiencies in order to provide report outlining recommendations for energy-saving improvements. The report should include detailed descriptions of each recommended energy efficiency measures. Next slide, please. We're also looking at renewable energy and storage recommendations. At specified facilities located in the city of Santa Rosa, the renewable energy and storage recommendations shall include a cost analysis of the project, utility cost savings, and the reduction of the city of Santa Rosa's carbon footprint as a result of renewable energy and storage project implementation. Next slide, please. The city of Santa Rosa is also looking for the most innovative and forward-thinking solutions available to transition from non-renewable energy sources to renewable sources, welcoming new ideas and creative thinking to identify potential projects. Next slide, please. We're also, as a part of this RFP, looking at microgrid technology. So we've identified Municipal Service Center North, Municipal Service Center South, the Transit Operating Building, Finley Community Center, the Fire Training Center, City Hall Complex, City Hall Annex, the Chamber Building, and the Public Safety Building. The consultant will conduct a feasibility study and make recommendations for microgrid technologies. Next slide, please. One of the reasons why we're bringing this to your attention now is we just wanted to let you know what we're doing. And we also wanted to check with the subcommittee to see if you had any additional comments or things that we may have missed in the RFP that we put out. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I'll just go individually. Ms. Rogers, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think that it's less about the RFP. I'm very supportive of the project that we're doing moving forward here. But to me, when we start to make the decisions around these sorts of things, what inevitably happens is that the cost to implement it exceeds our capacity or our funding levels. So what would be very helpful for me as well, and not necessarily in this RFP for obvious reasons, but for staff to also provide some form of ranking for the council in terms of priority amongst these facilities. So for example, I know where our emergency operations center operates out of. That to me would be a key one that we'd want to make sure that we had this level of resiliency sooner rather than later, while other things that are more called up luxuries in times of an emergency I'd probably prioritize later. So not in the RFP, but I do think that there's a little bit of an additional work for staff that would go a long way in terms of our ability to implement.
Great, thank you. Mr. Dowd, any questions or comments?
It doesn't have to be this afternoon, but I certainly want as part of the future presentations on this, where the renewable energy is coming from. And as Councilmember Rogers said, what are these various projects going to cost our citizens in the community?
Absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the reason why we put out an audit and we did not pursue an ESCO, we did not pursue the PG&E route, we did not pursue a public-private partnership where the private side would actually own our fixed asset, but we went with just the audit, is so that we can determine where the needs are. As far as the EOC goes, that's a Santa Rosa water building, so it's not a part of the general fund. And the energy audits for Santa Rosa water have already been completed.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Thank you.
The question I had, and I don't know if this is for you, Doug, or for Jason, on slide 7, where you had all those different city facilities, the last 4, City Hall Complex, City Hall Annex, Chamber Building, and Public Safety Building, have been in the discussions about trying to package it and have a one municipal service center for all city services. How would this effort work with our interest in bringing more operations into one building and potentially selling some of the sites where those current buildings exist?
That's a great question, Mayor, and that's one of the things that we're looking at in this study. Right now, we're mostly concerned with the existing buildings. So this particular area would not be identified in the microgrid study that we're going to do. I would recommend that when we get to a point when we're looking at a public-private partnership for City Hall, new PSB, that be a part of the building.
Okay.
And Mayor, I would concur with what Doug said. This is Jason Nutt, Assistant City Manager. I would recommend that if we look at a new if we're looking at a new building, that we incorporate these same design features into that study. For right now, we thought it was appropriate to pick our 2 most significant sites relating to capacity and functionality of the city operations for continuity of operations purposes. And that's why those 2 groupings were chosen to do this study for potential microgrid project. If there's a decision as we move forward further, as you said, we're looking to potentially change all of the aspects of that downtown property. You know, it's something we may want to defer into the future until we understand what that new structure or new area might look like.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful. My main interest is kind of like what I think Councilmember Rogers said, the prioritization. I'm not interested in investing dollars into buildings that aren't going to be, their useful life, either for whatever reason, is not going to be that great. More of the return on investment. And I know we have a lot of moving parts here, but as long as that's a filter that we're all looking at, I think that'd be helpful.
And so the other piece that I'll add is part of the reason that the team put together the 2 groupings was to not just look at individual buildings for microgrid, but to look at them potentially as a campus style program. And with the West Side campus and the downtown campus, and whether or not some type of microgrid could cover a portion or all of. And I think that's what we're going to see as we work our way through the proposals and in an effort to find the right vendor that's going to help us through this.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's very helpful. All right, subcommittee, any additional questions? Seeing none, we're now taking public comment on item 5.1. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. You'll have 3 minutes. Madam Host, would you facilitate the public comment portion of this item?
Of course, our first public comment will be from Mark Mortensen. Mark, I have enabled your speaking permissions. If you can unmute yourself, please.
Alrighty, I am unmuted.
And bear with me while I get the timer up. One moment, please. Can you confirm you see the timer on your screen?
I've got it, thank you.
Perfect. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Great, thank you. My name is Mark Mortensen, and I'm a resident of Santa Rosa and a member of two groups that are submitting the following letter. The two groups are Friends of the Climate Action Plan and the Working Group for Climate Emergency Action Now. We're pleased to see that on the meeting today, we have this opportunity to speak on creating a municipal microgrid for Santa Rosa, and we appreciate it. As you may know, construction will get underway in April of 2021 on the first front of the meter multi-customer clean energy community microgrid in Northern California. This project, which is dubbed the Redwood Coast Airport Microgrid, is a collaborative effort between the Schultz Energy Research Center at Humboldt State, PG&E, Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and Humboldt County. That project stakeholders have gone to great lengths to develop their microgrid in such a way as to make the processes, design, and business model replicable. Thus, templates of all the agreements, the operational roles and responsibilities, performance requirements, and more will be available for a project in Santa Rosa. This obviously provides an opportunity to reduce time and costs. The cost breakdown for various vendors, including controller hardware, software, DER system, and more, as well as the potential revenues, will also be available for assisting in smoothing the way for a project in Santa Rosa. For all these reasons, FOCAP and WECAN, the two groups that I'm talking for today, strongly support and advocate for the city to take the necessary next steps in developing a community microgrid in order to improve the city's resilience capabilities during the inevitable future climate-related incidents. The Alliance for a Microgrid project in Santa Rosa would include Sonoma Clean Power, PG&E, the City of Santa Rosa, all of whom expressed interest in pursuing microgrid projects. The Climate Center, Clean Coalition, and the Regional Climate Protection Authority would also be important supporters of such a project. We propose that funding for the project come from the PG&E settlement funds, and that funding allocate monies for all three stages of a community microgrid: municipal, commercial, and residential. Our groups encourage also using the templates from the RCAM project. And this statement is also emailed to everybody, so I'm not going to finish it, but it's the feasibility studies for the RCAM project are available. We encourage choosing a site for this project that will benefit municipal, commercial, and residential needs. And we understand that the first stage may need to be municipal, essential, but we understand that and appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thanks a bunch.
Thank you very much. Seeing no further hands raised, Mayor, I will go ahead and read the two email public comments that we have received. The first public comment: Dear Climate Action Subcommittee, this letter is to support a feasibility study of microgrids in Santa Rosa. Microgrids address at least two important energy issues in this climate change era: scale and resilience. Electricity must be our future, but the current large grid systems fail repeatedly, have been determined the cause of major fires, and remain downright dangerous. California has a fiery future, at least partly due to current electricity delivery systems. Sprawling power systems deemed by corporate standards to be efficient and profitable instead now cost millions each and every year to recover from ever bigger fires. These systems have no real place in our future. A feasibility study of microgrids that addresses applicability in Santa Rosa needs to be large enough in scope to show us how microgrids work for government buildings, commercial buildings, and residential homes. The study, perhaps of downtown and adjacent residential neighborhoods, would yield data useful, for example, to determine optimal mixes and to scale up the use of microgrid systems in the future. Costs could quite appropriately come from the new PG&E settlement funds. As climate change bears down, scale matters. Smaller, locally appropriate, manageable systems have promise of bringing the resilience we need. Resilience means to bounce back, the ability to recover quickly from difficulties, and as the fire years wear on, we seem to be in recovery pretty much all the time. We need to bounce back once again, but we cannot rely solely on currently failed systems that, in climate changing conditions, can be safe only when they are turned off. Resilience also means bouncing back smarter. Microgrids offer that promise. Sincerely, Elaine Wellen. And I have one more public comment to read. Hi, like a lot of other Santa Rosa residents feel that the centralized PG&E system is not working. The city of Santa Rosa should start the microgrid service in stages. Start with city municipal functions, police, fire, and work the kinks out. Moving forward, I would start a microgrid in the underserved Southwest area. Engaging the community is vital in moving microgrids forward. After all, residents elect their officials and pay taxes for services. A lot more to say, but this is a start. In gratitude, Mike Lepelt. And Mayor, that concludes the public comment that I have for this item.
Great, thank you for that. All righty, on to our next item of the agenda, item 5.2. And Amy, I think you're introducing this one also.
Yes. Item 5.2, battery electric bus replacement project, and Sean Souza will be presenting.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Schwedhelm and council members. My name is Sean Souza. I'm an admin analyst with the Transit Division. And whenever the slides are ready, it can go up, unless they are. Thank you so much. So we can actually go to the next slide. So today I wanted to bring an update to the Transit Division's plans on installing our electric infrastructure at the MSCS yard, along with our selection of the first battery electric buses, the first round. Next slide, please. This is just a refresher on our current fleet status. And as you can see, the first 3 rows are already at the end of their useful life of 12 years based on federal FTA standards. Now, this presentation is going to be focusing on the highlighted first row there of the 4 model year 2002 buses, which ended their useful life in 2015. Next slide. So this project began with the successful awards of FTA grants from fiscal year 17 and 18. And as you heard last week in the budget presentation, Transit's capital reserve was non-existent due to utilizing it for operations over the last few years. But we're going to be getting a bump due to some savings last year, and along with the CARES Act funding that we did receive, will cause us to have a return that will go back to our TDA fund. So we'll be needing at least the match amount listed here to cover the project. Now we're going to be pursuing some other funding sources for this, such as the VW Mitigation Fund and also the California HVIP program, but we aren't guaranteed award of those. And in fact, HVIP won't be opening money until next year. Next slide. Now, the federal money came at a great time as the California Air Resources Board came out with their innovative clean transit rule in 2018. And here's the timeline that the city is required to adhere to. Now, you can see we won't be required to start buying electric buses until 2026. But this federal funding, it was specifically for electric buses, the money that we were awarded. But this is good because it gives us a great opportunity to start getting familiar with the technology, how it works in our operations, all before becoming a full requirement. Next slide. So here we show the methods that we can buy a bus. And quite frankly, the amount of work involved in the first 3 along with the fact that there's economy of scale in the fourth option, less to hold out for a state contract that recently opened with the state Department of General Services. And in this contract, there are 2 bus manufacturers that build buses that the city can use. That's New Flyer and Proterra. Next slide, please. A few factors went into our bus selection. The first one is the distance, or how much a block is that a bus travels in one day. Most of our blocks are between 150 and 170 miles. So we don't want to start out with limiting what routes get to benefit from having an electric bus run them. And we don't want to also have to bring the bus partway through the day and replace it with a diesel bus to finish off the day's activities. The second factor is what level of state of charge or the remaining battery level at the end of the day we want there to be. We don't want them to be on the road running buses with people on them with 3% battery remaining. So we want to be able to consider that also batteries are going to degrade year over year. So not only how much charge do we want them to have available at the end of the day when we first buy the bus, but how much charge do we want them to have 4, 5, or 6 years down the road? Third, Santa Rosa is part of a joint study with the other transit providers in Sonoma County that Sonoma Clean Power spearheaded. Now, through that study by the Cadmus Group, they estimated that our efficiency would actually be higher than most manufacturer estimates. Now, that's not that we're more efficient. The manufacturer would actually show that their bus is going to be doing great in certain efficiency levels. Cadmus is saying that, due to the learning curve, the grades, the amount of riders, driver patterns, the ambient temperature outside would actually cause us to have a less efficient use of the power. So ultimately, on the fourth point there, we wanted a bus that had enough juice to run all day. We want there to be able to be used on any of our blocks, and we want to have enough state of charge at the end of shift to be able to do this over the course of some years. Next slide. Here we just wanted to point out that a battery electric bus has no tailpipe emissions. So the estimated GHG reductions by going from a diesel bus to a battery electric bus could be around 1,500 grams per mile. And that would be equivalent to about 52 metric tons per year per bus. And with the city's plans to go to evergreen power, the electric generation's GHG would even be less than the chart here showing 2016 California electricity mix. Next slide. So here, this chart shows us the options that we had available on the state contract. Basically, you could see here on the bottom is the efficiency level that we would be operating the buses at between the manufacturer suggested 1.8 to 2.5, and then the Cadmus suggestion between 2.5 and 3.6. Also to the left, you'll see the miles range between 90 and 310. Now, basically, there's only one bus that we felt confident could last the longest on the road with our estimated efficiency standards based on the Cadmus study and fall within the range of blocks that, again, the majority of our blocks run throughout the day. So that's the sweet spot there on that kind of top right area. And as you can see, there's only one bus that is able to meet that. Next slide. So the bus that we came up with that looks to meet our requirements the most is the Proterra Catalyst E2 Max with a 660 kilowatt battery pack on board. Now this chart shows us the 2 methods we have to purchase this bus. The first one is just an outright purchase, or the other option is to buy the bus itself without the battery and then lease the battery over the life of the bus. When we consider that the lease program automatically replaces the battery pack at the midlife or 6-year point, the cost of leasing ends up being about the same, if not lower than a direct purchase. And that's again because we get a free replacement using the lease program. Next slide. There's some other benefits to a lease. The first benefit we already mentioned is we get a free battery replacement at year 6. What's interesting about that is it could mean that the replacement battery that we get could be with better technology. It could be a lighter battery. It could be more efficient. It could even have more power in it. Who knows what's going to happen 6 years down the road? And since it's a lower upfront capital cost because we're only purchasing the base bus itself and not the batteries, with the money we have right now, we can get 4 buses on the road instead of 3. And also, if we have funding left over after the quote of the buses come in, we can actually use some of that funding to prepay some of our battery lease, maybe get a year or 2 paid off so we could start saving up for the 3rd or 4th. Next slide. So here's our proposal. The first is to get 4 buses and to use it and to get it with the battery lease program. If there's a little bit of money left over, use it towards the battery lease program. Next slide. Next, I'd like to discuss the status of the PG&E EV fleet program. Now, recently we signed the contract with them, and they were also on site in September to review the location that we're planning on having the power come into the MSC yard, and also to discuss where we plan on installing the charger infrastructure. This program will have PG&E install all the infrastructure, the poles, the above ground electrical wire, the transformers, all the way up to where the meter is going to be. Now, since the city is taking care of the remaining infrastructure, PG&E was able to provide an incentive for us to do the work. Additionally, we're eligible for a maximum rebate of $125,000 if we purchase 5 chargers. So the total value of PG&E's program that we're going to be using to the city is about $346,000. Next slide. Next slide, please.
One moment.
Sure.
There we go.
Great. So here, just kind of, here it talks about what the city is responsible for. We're, again, responsible now that the PG&E is going up to the meter. We're responsible for everything from the meter afterwards. Trenching, putting in all the wires to the charging pads, putting in the concrete pads, and putting in the chargers. So we do hope to start design and construction in May of 2021 and be completed by the end of 2021. We want to make sure we're done getting the charger infrastructure prior to when the buses would arrive. Of course, we're still looking for all the money to do this. So the contract with PG&E, though, for this particular program does commit the city to some particular items. One is that we have to have 5 chargers installed, and we have to have 9 buses by 2025. Now, this presentation did discuss our plans for the first 4 buses. We do have funding on the way for a recently awarded Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities grant. That's going to be for our 5th bus. But that still leaves us also with 4 buses that we are actively working on obtaining funding for. Next slide. So this is just kind of a picture, a snippet of the 2 sides of responsibility between PG&E and the city. Again, PG&E goes from the pole to the panel, and then we take care of from the panel all the way to the chargers. We do construct, own, and maintain the infrastructure on our part. PG&E takes care of their own part. Next slide. And for those of you familiar, this is just an overview map of MSCS, just kind of showing that just behind the garage is where we plan on parking our buses. You can see the red line is where PG&E is going to bring in the electrical, with the Thunderbolt being where the transformer is going to be placed and the meter. And then the 5 triangles there are going to be where we're going to place the chargers to charge 2 buses at a time. Next slide. So now just a brief recap of the entire project. Now, I just want to clarify the way I put it in the slide is kind of incorrect. The first point is we're planning on purchasing 4 buses, but using the battery lease program. So we're not leasing the buses themselves. We're actually buying them. We're just leasing the batteries with our current funding money. We're also working on the infrastructure to support these buses and the 5 future buses that we will get. And we're looking for ways to offset the shortfall in the available funding of $1.5 million to complete the project. Next slide. So that was all that I had in my presentation. So I thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, I might be able to answer for you.
Great, Sean. Thank you for that presentation. Start with you, Mr. Dowd. Questions?
I have historically had a concern about our transit system in the city of Santa Rosa, and talking with people from the transit district, there's always been a problem about where federal funding can come and help municipalities buy their buses. And there's kind of been a standard rule that to get federal help, we have to buy something like, or lease, whatever the arrangement is, like a 50-passenger bus. And there's a lot of needs, I think, in our community, without me saying I'm an expert, because I'm really not, but it seems like there's a place for, say, 15-passenger buses or 10, whatever's available out there, for some of the shorter routes that connect. My concern about what's being presented right now is, are we getting ahead of that analysis so that we buy the right kind of buses for the routes that we have. And then I've also heard talk that there was going to be a potential of coordinated transit system made up of Sonoma County, Santa Rosa, and Petaluma. And so how does that fit into this? I don't want us to get ahead of the programs that might make our system more efficient and effective.
Yeah, thanks, council member. That's good questions. I'll answer the part about the size of the buses, and my supervisor, Rachel, will probably be able to chime in with the TIES program as well. With regard to the size of the buses, when we applied for the grant, we did call out, FTA does specify that when you use federal awards, you have to replace bus like for like. So generally, if you get awarded for replacing a 40-foot bus, you have to replace it with a 40-foot bus. So that's what we originally submitted our application for. We did go through some work with our regional FTA to see about possibly getting a 35-foot bus, maybe a little bit smaller. But one of the problems that we noticed with battery electric buses, which again, this grant was specifically mandating, is that a 35-foot bus only goes up to about 440 kilowatt capacity. So to be able to get the 660 kilowatts that we wanted to be able to perform all of our blocks, we would have to go up to the 40-foot bus and stick with that size. So it kind of keeps it like for like the way FTA originally requires, and it allows us to do all of our blocks instead of just specific blocks that are on specific routes.
And I'd like to just chime in as well. These are great questions, Councilmember Dowd. And I'll just piggyback onto Sean's response on the first question. The other factor that's come into play with choosing 40-foot buses for this particular procurement and the transition to battery electric buses is that some of our shorter blocks that are less than the 150, 170 mile blocks are the types of routes that are more likely to potentially be changed into more of a micro transit or a TNC type service along the lines of what you're discussing. They're shorter routes, more like circulator routes. Those would be the prime candidates for a smaller vehicle, which could potentially also be an electric vehicle. So what we really were looking to do here was to bring in the electric buses as well to the kind of mass transit portion of our system, the main corridors. But that certainly doesn't preclude us from pursuing, our intention to work some of those smaller vehicles into our system for our lower demand areas. So I just wanted to add that as well. And then in terms of the coordinated system among Sonoma County Transit, Petaluma Transit, and Santa Rosa City Bus, this really, I think, fits right in. Right now, we have 2 systems running on diesel and 1 system running on CNG, which is Sonoma County Transit. We're all going to be transitioning to battery electric fleets. We've all studied the charging infrastructure jointly. We have opportunities to share charging infrastructure down the line, and we'll all be using ultimately the same vehicle technology. So from my perspective, this vehicle technology transition actually works very much towards the goal of a more coordinated and integrated system.
Okay, Mr. Gatt, any other questions? Not hearing any. Mr. Rogers, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a quick one. A couple of years ago when we first started talking about this, one of the conversation topics was about the charging infrastructure. And in particular, there was some discussion or some opportunity, I'm not sure which, about some on-site bus stop charging, whether it be a panel that the bus would pull on top of, and then while it was loading and unloading would charge a little bit, or a top charge loader. I know that was part of the discussion in terms of trying to get these buses to reach the capacity or the mileage that they needed to be effective throughout our system. And what I'm hearing is that whether it's the technology getting better or the size of the bus being bumped up, and thus the battery being bumped up, that we don't need that type of infrastructure to be able to make this program work, and that we actually can reach the capacity for these buses with the overnight charging, which remind me if I'm wrong, but I think a couple of years was not the case.
Yeah, a couple years back, initially, we were looking into both methods. And one of the things that really pointed us away from it was when the Cadmus study was completed. Their conclusion was it's very costly to get a en route service installed. The Transit Mall was our only location. And in talking with Petaluma and Sonoma County Transit, for them to get their bus to that location, they'd have to lay over for quite a long time. It wasn't too beneficial for them, so it would primarily have been for us. But also, too, we would have to buy buses with the infrastructure installed to be able to do the overhead or en route charging as well. So it kind of became we would have to choose that method of charging and plug along, which makes the cost of the bus a little bit more expensive. And ultimately in the Cadmus study, they realized that it just wasn't feasible for the amount of time available to charge when the stops were available during the day, but also the cost, it just didn't seem like that was beneficial, along with the fact that the battery sizes were increasing over time.
Yeah, I mean, pie in the sky, I'd love to see actually, some of this capacity built into some of the roadways that the buses drive on or electric vehicles drive on, so that there's some level of charge that can be done as they're being utilized. But I think we're certainly a long way off from that and definitely don't have the funding for it. So what I heard from this presentation is that the PG&E infrastructure that we were hoping to have the construction begin in May and be finished hopefully by the end of 2021. Does that mean that the public would start to see these buses, these 4 buses on the road actually at the beginning of 2022? Is that the type of lead time that I'm hearing?
Yeah, so we did speak with Proterra, and we did send them a letter of intent saying that we're looking to get their buses. We're planning on coming to council in late November, perhaps December, assuming that everybody here is good with it, but to get the approval to make the purchase. Proterra is telling us that it would be Q4 2021 or Q1 of 2022 for delivery. So that's what we're thinking, is assuming that delivery is consistent with what they're saying is going to be done, that we should probably have them on the road early 2022, within the first quarter or so.
And then you mentioned the 9 buses that are there with the 5 charging stations that we have PG&E doing. Is this going to build the capacity that we need long term for all 9 buses? Is there going to be a timing element that works to where we only need 5 for the 9 buses, or are we going to need additional work from PG&E when we purchase the final 4 buses to build capacity?
So yeah, when we had PG&E come out and discuss everything with them, they are building it out for us to be able to accommodate all 9 buses.
Okay.
So assuming we do get the 5 chargers in there, and we have to get the 5 chargers in there, but so what will happen is when we get these first 4 buses, our goal is to have 4 or 5 chargers installed right away. So each bus will have their own charger. This means that they'll be charged within the time that they've come back to the yard at night and have plenty of time before the morning shift starts to be able to get back on the road. When we do get our 5th bus, hopefully we'll have 5 chargers, so they'll still all have their own. The moment we get the other 4, they'll have to start sharing. So we'll have to plug 2 of the buses into a single charger. And we'll have the telematics programs for the chargers to smartly charge it, that they'll all plug in at the same time. But one charger will charge one bus up to about like 80%, move on to the next bus, get that to 80%, and then basically bring the rest of the bus to full charge it can before the morning shift. So it's possible that the morning will come with 2 full buses. It may be that one of the buses may only hit 95% charge and it may have to wait a little bit or just go out with an almost full charge. But yes, the PG&E will bring in power for the full 9 buses.
Okay, great. And it's gonna be great when we have a closed loop system here, where we have a microgrid that charges these overnight for a fully sustainable system there. Thank you so much.
On that same line of questioning, looking at, we have a total number of vehicles is 29 in our fleet. Is there the space, or what's our long range plan when we 100% electrify our bus fleet?
We're probably not going to go much or any faster than the ICT rule requires. When we get these first 4 buses, that's going to be a huge litmus test right there to see first off how this technology works. When manufacturers give their estimates on the efficiency standards. You know, they're saying 1.8 to 2.5. Cadmus did their study and said it's going to be a little bit worse than that. So to get our buses on the road, get our drivers used to driving them, seeing how maybe we can get their efficiency level to be better over the course of time. Maybe we could start buying smaller battery capacities in the future. So we have a lot to learn with these first 4 buses. And once the ICT rule kicks in with 2026, you know, again, we only have to purchase 25% of the buses as electric. So if need be, if we have 4 buses to buy, only one of them needs to be electric. And the other thing is, with all the changes in the technology, Proterra just announced another new bus coming out that is lighter on frame with the same size battery. So, you know, just a couple of years changes things in the field already. So by then, hopefully we'll have learned enough to see, you know, can we get by with perhaps less battery, lighter buses, smaller buses, things like that.
And Mayor, this is Jason Nutt again, just to clarify a little bit as well. From a space standpoint in our yard, we have we have enough space to handle charging 29 buses, or what we may find is we have to expand the fleet because of the battery range considerations. And so a lot of that's going to depend, as Sean mentioned, for us to learn more about how the batteries work in our system of operation. But from the ability to be able to park those vehicles and charge them, we have the space in the yard. The electrical system that PG&E is assisting us with does not have the capacity today to expand beyond the 9 buses. So we would have to continue to work with PG&E in the future to further expand the size of the power infusion into our yard to make that happen. Or as Councilmember Rogers mentioned, some alternative energy source coming in to help us make that happen. But as far as the physical world, we have the capacity to make that work.
That's great. And I also recognize this is new technology. You know, any technology 12 years old is ancient. So it's really hard to predict the future. And I'm also guessing that future councils, even if it's only a 25% mandatory, I'm guessing future Santa Rosa city councils may want to get electrified a little bit earlier than what is federally mandated. And then regarding these 4 buses, can you talk a little bit about the impacts of COVID and some of the adjustments that we've had to make to the interiors? Are the buses that we're getting going to be normal stock ones, and any modifications that may or may not need to be in place depending upon when they become operational? That would be up to the city to reconfigure?
Yeah, so with the letter of intent we sent to Proterra, basically they're getting their team together to be assigned to Santa Rosa. That team will be working with us to start selecting our options, what's going to be on the bus. So we will be able to see if they do have any type of barriers or anything like that that can assist with the COVID-19. But if they come in with just a normal stock, if their options are, you know, based off of a year ago option list, then we would be responsible once we get the bus to institute any of the upgrades to the bus. But we haven't received any options list from the team yet.
Okay, and then can you let us know what is the term you used was federal useful life? So if we're not buying the battery, releasing that, what is the useful federal life of the bus that we're purchasing?
So FTA calls a 40 or a full-size bus 12 years. So 12 years is the useful life of a bus. So we can keep it longer in use, but FTA basically says that they feel that there's 12 years worth of life in that bus with federal money that you should be able to use that bus. Anything less than that, well, you should be able to use it for 12 years with federal money. If you keep it longer, that's kind of on your own.
I would guess, you know, and tell me if we should not be looking at that. That sounds like old technology. In other words, the engine, the other moving parts. With an electric bus, AKA the engine, if we're leasing that, I would think the shell of the bus would have a longer useful life. Or is that not the way to look at it?
Well, it's possible. So, you know, with these diesel buses, like on that slide number 3, it's the whole bus, engine and shell and everything like that. And generally it's the engine, transmission, things like that are failing on the bus. With these new buses, you know, if we have the bus, the 12 years passes where the lease is over. If the bus itself is still fine, we can always slap another battery on there and keep it going. Or we can just, if we're back on track with FTA, because as you can see with that third slide again, we are kind of behind. We've already got, 5 buses that are well past useful life, 3 buses that are end of useful life this year. So if we were to stick with FTA's guidelines of 12 years, when we get the electric buses, like you mentioned too, though, technology changes so much, it's possible that by the time ICT is enacted, better technology is out there that might actually make sense to stick with a 12-year life cycle.
And I'm sorry, I just wanted to chime in as well. The federal 12-year guideline is really focused on, if we take a bus out of service before 12 years, we're required to repay the federal government, the remaining federal interest in that vehicle. It's just their way of making sure that the federal resource is really utilized. So we typically keep buses, as Sean pointed out, longer. Our transit asset management plan actually sets a useful life of about 15 years for a bus. We don't want to keep them much longer than that, but we, through our excellent maintenance team, typically keep buses in great shape beyond the 12 years. So I just wanted to clarify that as well, that we're going to have an opportunity to learn about this technology and how well it holds up, and what kind of life we can get out of the vehicle as a whole.
Rachel, and I appreciate that, and that's why, again, being the owner of an electric car, there's no oil changes. Some of the things, I don't have a mechanic like I did with my internal combustion engine, and I would think fewer moving parts, it's different technology to apply the same standard. Because I totally get that reimbursement from the federal level, but from a council person perspective, when I see end of federal useful life, I start thinking liability. We need to get a funding mechanism to replace them when there should be replaced. So I guess I would just be interested at some point to hear, no, with this, if you're leasing the battery, you should expect, heck, 20 years out of the shell, as long as you're getting new batteries, because that's the big thing that needs to be replaced.
For sure. Yeah. And I would say, we're finding that components start to really fail on the diesel buses, 15 years and later, but it's a lot of the same components aside from the drivetrain on these electric buses. But this is a new experience, and there aren't a lot of properties out there that have 12 years in on these electric buses. So I think as we get into the experience and as some of the early adopters reach the end of that 12 years, we're going to have a lot more information about how well these vehicles hold up and can potentially make some adjustments. So we'd be happy to bring more information back on that.
Great. Thank you. Okay, Chris or Dick, any more questions before we go to public comment? All righty. We're now taking public comments on item 5.2. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. You'll have 3 minutes. Madam Host, could you please facilitate the public comment on item 5.2?
Of course, I am not seeing any hands raised, Mayor, and I have no email public comment.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for that presentation, Sean. It was excellent.
Thank you.
All right, on to item 5.3. Amy, you're up again.
Thank you. Item 5.3, shared mobility devices, and Nancy Adams will be presenting.
Mayor, I don't know if Nancy lost connection, but I'm not seeing her as a participant. I did see her previously.
Mayor, I'm reaching out to her right now via text.
I was just going to say this might be a wonderful opportunity for our Assistant City Manager to step in. And Jason, if she is not available, we could go to 5.4 and come back if she's be available a little bit later.
Yeah, I did hear that that Mr. Henowitz is available, and I think Nancy is attempting to connect. I'd prefer to have her give the presentation rather than me, although she and I talked briefly about it. But if you'd like, we can go on to 5.4. Although, hold on, Ms. Adams said she just connected in.
Okay.
Nancy, I have given permission to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. And I had my iPad and I switched off, and I think that's what messed me up. So good afternoon, Mayor and Council Member Dowd and Council Member Rogers. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about an update on the shared mobility devices. So next slide, please. So just a little bit of background on this. Staff has been working on this probably for, well, we actually started with a presentation, bicycle and pedestrian board here, and then in place, conditions kind of put things on pause for this. We're dusting off the cobwebs and actually starting our outreach to committees and boards, and then ultimately to the city council, hopefully next month. So shared mobility devices and technology, it's kind of surged in the last several years, and part of what the staff has been doing over the last few months is looking at how cities, particularly in California, are trying to meet the mobility needs of people that live in the city, work, and tourists. So one of the things that you hear a lot about in the news is e-scooters, and with those devices, there's a lot of challenges to riders and pedestrians, and really how the use of public right-of-way is used in cities. So that's one thing that we want to make sure that we're cognizant of as we move forward with considering this in Santa Rosa. And just as a way of background as well, the Sonoma County Transportation Authority and the Marin Transit Authority have a pilot bike share program that hopefully someday soon is going to launch. We actually was on a call just this afternoon, and the staff from the SCTA is anticipating that this should be launched probably in the spring of 2021 once the weather conditions change. Please. So I wanted to really bring this concept in context with the Climate Action Plan, which is really what this subcommittee looks at in terms of policymaking and actions and implementation for the city of Santa Rosa. So the transportation sector is a large part of where we get our GHG emissions, over 51%. And typically, the tracking mechanism for the GHG transportation sector is vehicle miles traveled. So one of the goals in the Climate Action Plan is to look at transportation options which increase the availability of alternatives to the signal, will help reduce VMTs and our GHG emissions. And shared mobility devices create connections to smart and city bus potentially. So next slide, please. So staff has looked at probably about 12 different California cities that have really kind of embarked on this journey in terms of trying to figure out how to look at regulating these devices. And one of the issues, well, a few of the issues and concerns that have arisen as they're actually responding to these devices being deployed in jurisdictions are issues with dropping off, parking, and cluttering the public right-of-way, looking at safety concerns with the operations, and just looking at how these devices are, trying to be consistent with the rules of the road and enforcement, and just the interactions, the safety concerns with the operations of these devices, how they interact with pedestrians. And then lastly, there's certainly indemnification of, so next slide, please. Thank you. So as I was saying, staff has looked at about 12 different California cities that have kind of embarked on this journey, whether in response to devices being deployed or taking a proactive approach, which, if the city council considers that as a feasible approach, we would be in that realm of trying to be proactive and actually be a leader within our county in the North Bay, and in providing some mechanisms for shared mobility devices to operate within the city and go beyond that. So I think this is a great opportunity for us to take a lead role in being proactive with responding to these technologies and these devices. So you can see the range of regulatory approaches that cities have already begun to either enact or are under consideration. So it ranges from banning them within their jurisdiction to pilot programs, and then there's one that was kind of a laissez-faire, which there was no regulation. And then by and large, most of the cities are regulating these via a permit process. So there's a few cities that I listed parenthetically at the bottom that I've looked at. There's a handful more that since this slide was produced that kind of have added to that. So there's quite a few in the Bay Area. One that's not showing up there is Emeryville. They also have an ordinance. So there is quite a few cities in the Bay Area that are looking at regulating these devices within their jurisdiction. So next slide, please. There's a couple of bills that were introduced. One was actually just enrolled in September, and the other one is being amended, was last amended in July. So there's a couple of state legislations that address shared mobility devices, and just wanted to let the committee know that as well. And then next slide, please. And then Santa Rosa has some existing code that actually addresses skating and the use of scooters. Right now, it's just defined as within the downtown area and a specified railroad square area, and there are some other specified public properties within the city. So we do have some code already that does preliminarily address the use of scooters within the city. So that wanted the subject to that. And then secondly, the California Vehicle Code also as well. So next slide, please. So I'm here today really to give the subcommittee an update on this, and I wanted to let them know really how this interfaces with the policies and the goals of the Climate Action Plan. And so I would be grateful to hear from the subcommittee members if there's anything as I move forward, I am planning on going to the Bicycle and Pedestrian Board in mid-October with a follow-up on this item with them. And then ultimately to the full council, probably the end of October with a study session. And so with kind of the goal of developing an ordinance that would address, how we would regulate these shared mobility devices, and really actually we are considering a little broader ordinance. And your last item talked about emerging technologies and whatnot, and we see this initiative as there's so many future opportunities which we haven't even thought about, and those would involve robotics, like the first and last mile delivery. How do we, for goods and services? And so we want the ordinance, I think, to be a little broader to address future technologies which we haven't really seen yet, but I feel that they're not that far off. So it to be nimble and to address those not only in the short term, but also technologies in a little longer time frame. So I would like to hear if there's any questions that the subcommittee has, or any direction or guidance that you would want us to incorporate into the final conversation with the full council during the study session next month. So I think I've already talked the next steps, which is the next slide. So yeah, so there's the next steps, and I will stop there and listen to any questions. And I appreciate the time this afternoon, and sorry about the technical glitch. So that concludes my presentation.
All right. Thank you, Nancy. I'll start with you, Mr. Rogers. Do you have any questions or feedback related to the presentation?
Yeah, so Nancy, and I apologize if I just missed this in your presentation, but are there currently any shared mobility device companies that want to operate in Santa Rosa that either can't because of what our current code says, or are waiting for us to get an ordinance across the finish line?
So I haven't had anyone specifically address, operations. I have had a lot of, emails that I have that are people that are interested, but it hasn't really gone to a formal, like, yes, I want to operate. I know there's interest out there, and I think that's, in conversations with staff, I think that's really, we want to be proactive to make those regulatory frameworks, establish that framework, so that we can be responsive to vendors who are interested in coming into Santa Rosa, and have a permit system or whatever the council decides to establish set. So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm a little tickled to see the discussion, just because 3-ish years ago, I was at the Council of State Governments, and where they get together and they periodically talk about emerging issues amongst different states. And this was one of the top issues, was they were trying to figure out how to regulate these. And I brought it back, and then Mayor Corsi, he and I were having a heated discussion about whether you should require a docking station or not. And we happened to be down in Long Beach for the League of Cities, and I would point out to him every time there was a scooter that was improperly docked, or was in the middle of the road, or was blocking the right of way. So I do know that there are a lot of best practices that are out there that folks have been working on. I know that one of them, I want this to be permissive. I'll start with that. I do think when we look at our 51% of our greenhouse gas emissions coming from transportation, we need to be permissive to give folks options that aren't their cars. But I do also think that one of the best practices that I've heard talking to different jurisdictions is some form of a permit for operators, that when somebody signs up to utilize their shared mobility device, that they that they have some form of fine structure if the person leaves it where it's inappropriate, or in the street. Or, and this is my preference, in some locations, I know that they have actually committed to hiring some folks, particularly folks who are homeless or trying to get back on their feet to actually corral the different devices and bring them back to their docking stations and pay for those positions. So I don't care how we do it. I want to make sure that there is some level of accountability to make sure that those devices get back to where they're supposed to be and not in the right of way. And then outside of that, I think we need to be having conversations about how to make this program adoptable for the general public.
Mr. Dowd, any questions?
Mayor, if I could just chime in really quick. This is Jason Nutt again. Council Member Rogers. So most of these companies have the ability to address the restocking and repositioning. I mean, I'm sure you're aware, Lime, they call their employees juicers. They'll actually pick up all of the devices, they'll charge them and then replace them. What some of the ordinances have done is they've actually required a certain time frame to have each of the products replaced at a certain location. And so while I understand the interest in wanting to potentially have the city be in a role to assist them, most of those companies have employees that are responsible for doing those in compliance with whatever the permit conditions are set.
Yeah, and to be clear, I'm just interested in the city having some form of a permit process that requires them to have their own internal processes in place, so that we do have an ability to provide some level of compliance on them.
This is Nancy back. So to Jason's point, the vendors are, and you'll see this once we get the bike share active. They are, there are specs within their agreement to rebalance vehicles and to keep them out of the right of way, and there are penalties and fines if they don't as vendors. So yeah.
And then I guess this is a more broad question. For the scooters, I suppose, more so than the bikes, I wouldn't think that there would be a requirement that they stay within the bike lanes. But I also can see significant safety issues if they're not. So I don't know how we address that currently and how we would address that with electric scooters.
Yeah, so I don't know if Rob is still on the call, but I asked him this question, and maybe Jason would know. So I think your question is, can you take a scooter on a class 1 path, like along the creek? Is that your question, Chris?
Yeah. So I know that they're not allowed.
I don't know, Jason or Rob, can you? Not exactly sure what the code says on that.
I know, this is Jason. I know Rob had other conflicts later this evening, so he might not have been able to stay on. When it comes to vehicle code conditions, it's our intent to treat scooters like bikes. So most communities say that if the vehicle code allows a bike to be there, that the scooter would allow to be there as well. Where we get into some complications is what we're starting to see is the migration of what shared mobility means. Some communities are seeing Uber and Lyft, their shared mobility versions go into mopeds as a potential similar product. Those we would not allow within a bike lane, or we would not allow on a multi-use path because we don't allow motorcycles. Those also require that community members that are renting them have the appropriate license. But when we're talking e-bikes or shared bicycles or scooters, as long as they're complying with the rules of the road as is mandated for bicycles, they would be allowed to go there. And so if we have a local ordinance, for example, in Courthouse Square that prohibits the use of a bicycle, an e-scooter would also yet be prohibited at that location. So that's the direction that I think we would go in this case. In a lot of communities, they also regulate the speed at which those scooters can go. I mean, I've seen them around here right now that are privately owned that are doing 30, 35 miles an hour. That would not be our intent under a permit to allow scooters to travel at that speed. And so most communities seem to have set a limit at 15 miles an hour, which make it more compatible with pedestrians and bicycles using the bike lane. So there's a lot of these pieces that we have set aside and identified that we would be bringing forward in an ordinance.
Yeah, and I was going to mention, I know that with electric bikes, That's a particular conversation topic as well, and that there's legislation that has been enacted that sort of distinguishes the difference between an electric bike and a motorcycle. And it's around the speed and with the regulators that are placed on the bikes. So that makes a lot of sense with the scooters. Thank you.
Mr. Dowd, any questions?
Yes, since I was on the original Sonoma County feasibility study on formation of what became Sonoma Clean Power Authority, one of the things that we used to our significant advantage was that Marin Clean Energy was formed before ours was. And the Marin Clean Energy people were very, very helpful in advising us what they thought they had done well and telling us what they thought they could have done better in certain areas. And it really gave us a head start. And with this presentation, there was approximately 12 cities that are in this process. I certainly am expecting that our staff and any consultants that are hired are finding out the same kind of issues. What did these municipalities do well and what did they not do so well as they put forth a program for these shared mobility devices? I as Councilmember Rogers said, he's in favor of it moving forward, and I am as well. But we might as well use the guidelines from some of the other municipalities that are ahead of us. That's my comment.
All right, thank you for that, Dick. I those are some of my same comments. For the 27th study session, I would like a lot more input about what worked, what didn't work. But the other thing too is just the metrics that we'd be using for success, whether it be we want X number of riders, because I'd also be interested in hearing what those companies that offer shared mobility devices, what do they like to see in a city that's gonna, I would want our ordinance to be able to open it so that people want to do business with us. And the other group that I'd love to hear information from, who's ultimately going to be using this? Because I think that would be a very important perspective to hear from as we set up an ordinance. If we're trying to increase, capacity, it's similar to what we've been talking about with the buses. How do we get people who want to ride on the buses? It's convenience. They feel safe on it. Well, with these devices, what would the end users want to see that we would have control of? So, Nancy, that's just, I think you have the great framework for the whole council, but I would just like a little bit more in-depth detail about what works, what doesn't work, and what's our ultimate goal so we can craft an ordinance that's going to try to meet that objective. And with that, are there any additional questions, Dick and Chris, before I go to public comment?
So Mayor, I know that Nancy's audio has kind of been cutting in and out a little bit. Thank you for those comments. And I think in the discussions that we've had with Nancy in developing not only this presentation, but we've already started to build the presentation for October. I think we'll be able to answer a majority of those questions moving forward. We know a lot of that. We have a lot of those answers. We just didn't want to take a substantial amount of time to go through it here. We wanted to get some preliminary feedback.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're now taking public comment on item 5.3. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. You'll have 3 minutes. Madam Host, would you facilitate public comment on item 5.3?
Of course. I am not seeing any hands raised, Mayor, but I do have one email public comment. Hi, I want to comment on Climate Action Subcommittee number 5.3 regarding SMDs. I'm a long-term cyclist and electric bike rider for 10 years. Some concern has been raised about e-bikes and pedestrian safety. To be sure, it's not the pedal assist electric bike that's an issue, since my regular road bike will exceed speeds that I can attain on my electric bike. It's all about bike ped infrastructure. We need separated bike paths to encourage more folks of all levels and ages to feel safe. This also would solve any concerns about e-bike, conventional bikes, and pedestrians clashing. For multi-user paths, simple obeying signage for speed and alerting pedestrians via voice or a bell or horn is a common courtesy. If there appear to be complaints issues, then enforcing such rules via citation could be an option. Your attention to this is important. Thank you, Mike LaPelt. And that concludes our public comment for item 5.3.
Great, thank you for that. All right, on to item 5.4. Amy.
And 5.4, countywide goal of zero waste by 2030. Joey Henowitz presenting.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. This is Joey Henowitz here again, before you, administrative analyst in the Transportation and Public Works Department. Oh, we can go to the next slide, please. So just a little bit of background. I'm not going to take too much time on this. I know you've heard some of the stuff from me in the past, but kind of setting the stage for why we're looking to have this countywide goal for zero waste by 2030. Many scientists acknowledge the unsustainable pace at which we're consuming our natural resources. And obviously there's a lot of environmental impacts associated with that. What we're really trying to focus on here within the solid waste world and the zero waste world here locally, within Sonoma County here in Santa Rosa with myself is landfill reduction, kind of source reduction, as well as diversion from the landfill in the form of recyclables and especially compostables. It's extremely important that the organic waste, which includes food waste, be diverted from landfill disposal. In California, nearly 2/3 of the waste stream is organic waste in some form. When you look at either if it's paper, food waste, or lumber, are the kind of highest three contributors. And an interesting statistic is food waste alone accounts for nearly 20% of the waste that's going to landfill, which could be repurposed, turned into compost, turned into a soil amendment, and help reduce GHG emissions at the same time. Another thing that we're going to have to keep in mind here locally, it might seem like a long time, but in the scheme of finding a landfill, siting a landfill, permitting a landfill, this landfill that we have here in Sonoma County is only about approximate a life of about 26 more years. And basically around 15 years out, you need to start planning for another landfill. So we're going to be soon looking at potentially having to do that. Next slide. So where did this Sonoma County Zero Waste Resolution come from? It came out of the AB 939 Local Task Force, which is a county-created advisory group to the Board of Supervisors and Zero Waste Sonoma. And it's made up of a bunch of different people. There was input from North Bay Jobs for Justice, 350 Sonoma, Sierra Club Redwood Chapter, the Compost Coalition of Sonoma County, Sonoma County Conservation Action, among other local businesses, advocacy groups, and engaged citizens. And they developed this model zero waste resolution that they recommended, that they adopt, and they recommended to bring to the Sonoma County jurisdictions for potential adoption. Several jurisdictions in Sonoma County have adopted this resolution already. Some of those include Cloverdale, Cotati, Healdsburg, Petaluma, Sebastopol, and Windsor. It was adopted back in 2018. Part of the reason for the delay on my end bringing this forward to the City Council was first and foremost, we wanted to achieve and actually get past our own zero waste master plan, which we passed earlier this year. And then secondly, obviously there's been some delay just due to the COVID situation, but we're happy to bring this forward to you here this evening. And along those lines, the LTF's Zero Waste Task Force not only gave a resolution, but they also gave and developed several suggestions and initiatives to further implement zero waste. Some of those areas include source reduction, recovery and reuse, education and outreach, and green purchasing policies. Next slide. So really kind of what is the resolution is asking of Santa Rosa, is requesting of Santa Rosa and going to hold us to. First and foremost, it looks towards establishing a goal of zero waste by 2030. This actually aligns right with our master zero waste plan that was passed by City Council, so that lines up greatly. It does ask us to adopt a Zero Waste International Alliance definition of zero waste. I won't read that out to you there, but you can read it there on the screen. It does also ask a jurisdiction to assume a leadership role in promoting and educating zero waste principles, which I would argue that we are already taking our lead, and we have done so with the passage of the Master Zero Waste Plan and the work that I will be hopefully bringing forward to you here soon over the next year or two. And ultimately, really, what we're doing by signing this zero waste resolution is we understand that our kind of zero waste master plan is specific to Santa Rosa with focused strategies, measurable goals, and dedicated funding. But it's important for us to demonstrate our commitment to zero waste countywide. And by adopting this zero waste resolution, Santa Rosa would maintain that consistency throughout Sonoma County. Next slide. So that's really all I have for you tonight. What I would be requesting of you is the review, obviously, of the zero waste resolution, and hopefully that we could bring this forward to the full council for consideration for adoption here in the near future.
All right, thank you, Joey. Mr. Dowd, any questions or comments? None? Mr. Rogers?
Just two quick questions, Joey. Looking at the ordinance, let me find the first one. On bottom of page 1, it says, whereas although the substantial recycling progress to date has been slower than expected, waste disposal rates per person per day have increased by 35% since 2012. That maybe it's fried at the end of a long day. But when I was reading through that yesterday, does that mean that we've seen a 35% reduction in total waste going to the landfill? Or does that mean that we've seen an increase, that even though we're recycling more, we're seeing a 35% increase in waste going to the landfill? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And so what that is saying is since 2012, and this was actually written in 2018, so you're comparing it from 2012 to 2018, is that the disposal, the 35% disposal, the tonnages have increased 35% in waste, in garbage, in the gray bin, so to say.
Okay, so we're recycling more, but we're also putting more into the landfill.
Correct.
Okay, great. I mean, not great, but at least I understand it better. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then at the very top of page 3, it commits to empowering these actions as a jurisdiction and a member of Zero Waste Sonoma. The second bullet point, the first one on page 3, is achieve 75% diversion from landfills by 2030. Is that in conflict with the zero waste definition? And I don't think it is, but I wanted to verify.
You know, it's really not, because that's going to be an aspirational goal, is to get to a true kind of functional zero. We always want to try to achieve that functional zero. Realistically, it's going to be probably nearly impossible for us to completely get rid of all of the waste that we consume here as society. The goal for zero waste, and I wanted to frame it with the 75%, because that does align with the goal for zero waste that we put forward in the Zero Waste Master Plan. So anything above that, is going to be great. But, ultimately, for what it's worth, our goal for zero waste by 2030 would be to try to achieve that 75% diversion.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Joey, my only questions or comments would be, how is the city of Santa Rosa doing towards this? What operational impacts might it have to be, when we start talking about leader in this area, how is the city as an organization doing? And what impacts might there be?
What I would say, Mayor, is I'd say that we're actually acting as the leader in the county right now, with the fact that we have passed our Zero Waste Master Plan earlier this year. I'm working with Jason and the finance team to develop our funding mechanisms for that, to bring that back to council for your guys' review and discussion. And I will be, over the next about year to a year and a half, I'll be bringing forward a bunch of multiple kind of policy elements that we're going to be bringing forward to city council in the form of a reusable and compostable food ordinance, which you discussed last meeting, mandatory recycling and composting ordinance to make that mandatory across the city. And then once we're able to get some funding mechanisms, able to facilitate some additional support for education and on the ground assistance, which would be the targeted technical outreach. So Right now, I would say I'm in the implementation kind of planning stages right now at the moment, but I would say within the next year or two, we should actually start to see some of these programs and policies and ordinances put into place.
So I appreciate that. I'm just a big believer that we need to be modeling the behaviors we're asking of others. And so getting feedback about how the city of Santa Rosa, all of our departments are doing in this area, it would be important for me to be regularly updated on. So how we would get that information, I don't know. It's just a request of staff that, I agree, we're taking leadership. But let's make sure we're modeling those behaviors, and we need some of the data points to demonstrate to the community that yes, the city of Santa Rosa truly, we're walking the talk.
And I would agree. And part of what I've been wanting to do, and I did last year, I did institute our 3-bin system here at all city facilities. So we do have the 3 bins. So we're at least demonstrating to the community in that respect that we do have our 3 bins. As far as actual data points on how we're doing on diversion, just based on the city specifically, I'd probably have to work on that for you. It has been one of the things that I'd like to do, is to kind of go around and check and see how some of the departments are doing as far as, are they actually using the green bin properly? And I do plan to do that. So I will look a little bit deeper into that, and I will try to bring back you with some more information on that in the future.
And Mayor, this is Jason again. Just let me add into some of the things that Joey just mentioned. As we brought to you the last Climate Action Subcommittee, Joey's taking a very aggressive approach at all of the techniques relating to zero waste, with the idea of having the city be the leader, not just within our own organization, but throughout our community, Sonoma County and the North Bay. That is the goal that Joey's really focusing in on. And I think he demonstrated that by showing you the compostable foodware ordinance and how aggressive we're attempting to push this. And he's incorporating that into a lot of the ordinances that he's starting to prepare. Once we get a funding stream in place, the intent is to actually start to create a division that's sole focus is dealing with solid waste, both from a zero waste standpoint, but also from the traditional handling of our solid waste program. So I just wanted to kind of chime in and say that I think Joey's taking all of those comments that you had about walking the talk and really doing his best under our current situation to implement those in the ways that he has and the capacity that he has at this moment.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that, Jason. To me, it's just real important because I think it's just behaviors, and part of it's education. And the behaviors are all of us on council, including all the city staff. I just want to make sure we're part of the solution and not part of the problem. Okay, Dick or Chris, any other comments before we go public comment on this? All righty. We're now taking public comments on item 5.4. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, please raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. You'll have 3 minutes. Madam Host, would you facilitate public comment on item 5.4?
Of course. I am not seeing any hands raised, Mayor, and I did not receive any email public comment on this item.
All right, thank you. Item 6 on our agenda is a subcommittee report. Either subcommittee member, I don't have a report. Do either of you have a report? With no reports, we're not going to take public comment on that. Department reports. Are there any department reports for this subcommittee meeting?
Yes, please. Thank you and good evening, Mayor and council members. I just have a quick report. This is Amy Nicholson. I'm a senior planner with the Planning and Economic Development Department, and I'm pleased to assume the role of staff liaison to the subcommittee. And I really look forward to continuing to work with each of you and also the community on these important issues. Just a quick update on some planning work related to climate action. Planning staff is continuing to work remotely. We are seeing the same volume of development review applications currently as we were last year at this time. We are continuing our work on a number of policy efforts related to climate action planning, including the Downtown Station Area Specific Plan, which will go to the Planning Commission this Thursday and the Council on October 13th. We are also well underway on the Comprehensive General Plan update. There is a contract amendment going forward to the council this coming Tuesday, which will integrate an updated climate action plan into our new general plan. And we also have opened the application period for the Community Advisory Committee. So that period closes on October 2nd, although it can be extended depending on the number of applications that we receive. I've mentioned this workshop to you in previous subcommittee meetings, but as a reminder, we are working with a nonprofit group called EcoAdapt and Virginia Tech to schedule a workshop which will assess climate-induced vulnerabilities and help us identify adaptation measures. And we'd like to incorporate this information into the climate action plan and general plan. At this point, we're planning to hold these meetings virtually later this fall or early next or this winter. And we will be bringing forward the scope of these workshops to you at the next climate action subcommittee meeting. We are starting a missing middle housing ordinance, which would allow for by right housing in areas that are in close proximity to service and transit. And this will really allow for more dense development that fits in with characteristics of existing single family neighborhoods. And finally, we are working on an update to the local hazard mitigation plan. And at this point, it's a collaborative effort with the County of Sonoma and other cities within the county. And this will result in an updated local plan that will go before the council sometime in 2021. And that completes my report.
Great, thank you for that, Amy.
Sure.
I have one question. You mentioned the Citizen Advisory Council for the general plan update.
Yes.
October 2nd. Just so I'm tracking this, it will be, staff will select 18 members. And then once those 18 members are selected, then each council member will have one person that he or she can appoint to this body. Do I have that correct?
I do not have an answer to that question. I'm not sure. I know Amy Lyle was originally listening, and I'm not sure if she has speaking rights, but I can confirm that with her, and I can send you a follow-up email if she's not on here and able to address your question.
Good evening. This is Amy Lyle, Supervising Planner. Can you repeat the question one more time for me, please?
So I know we had discussions at council about the Citizen Advisory Council or Committee for the general plan update. And my understanding was going to be a 25-person body that staff would select 18. We waived the council policy, and then council, each individual council member would appoint one person to that body. And I just want to confirm that just because October 2nd is right around the corner.
Yes, that is correct. So staff will be bringing forward 18, and then we will be asking the council to each appoint one. And so that will be coming to your agenda most likely late October. We're still working on identifying a date. We wanted to make sure we get through the application period and get a full array of applications that we would like to see.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that, Amy. Mr. Rogers, do you have any questions on Amy's report? Mr. Dowd? No questions? Okay, we're now taking public comment on item 7. If you wish to make a comment via Zoom, raise your hand. If you're dialing in via telephone, please dial *9 to raise your hand. Madam Host, could you facilitate public comment on item 7?
Of course, I see one hand raised. Mike Turgeon. Mike, I have enabled your speaking permissions. If you can unmute yourself.
Yes, can you hear me?
And I can. Bear with me while I get the timer pulled up. One moment, please. Please confirm you can see the timer on your screen.
I can.
Wonderful. Please identify yourself for public record if you so choose, and your time begins now.
Mike Turgeon with Friends of the Climate Action Plan. I apologize if item 7 is what I'm going to speak on, but I just briefly wanted to ask that if we know when the next Climate Action Subcommittee would meet. And then also I'd like to just make a brief word of tribute to David Guin. This whole meeting, all of the presentations by the staff just had this background of David's good work over the last 17 years. And as Friends of the Climate Action Plan, we miss him, but we are delighted that the people that he has worked with over the years have been so present tonight. And thank you very much, David.
I have one more hand raised, Mark Mortensen. Mark, I have enabled your speaking permissions.
Great, thanks again. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in also a quick welcome to Amy and our two groups, Friends of the Climate Action Plan and the Working Group on Climate Emergency Action Now Weekend. We're both looking forward to working with her. So thank you very much.
Mayor, I see no further hands raised and I received no email public comment on this item.
All right, thank you for that. If I, just in regards to our next meeting, my understanding is, and again, Amy, this is maybe more for you, due to the evolving nature of council direction and goals, we tend to package things together versus setting a specific date right today. Is that accurate? That we will be having one, we'll be doing the public notice once we do select the date, but that date is not quite yet known.
That's correct. We haven't confirmed a date. We are looking at potentially a date in late November, but it would need to be the week prior to Thanksgiving. So we haven't confirmed that everyone's availability for that November meeting, but once we confirm it, we will make sure that it's noticed accordingly.
Great, thank you. That was my assumption. I just didn't want to say, no, we don't have a date, and then we did, but okay. So with that, no further items to discuss on our September 22nd Climate Action Subcommittee meeting agenda. We will adjourn the meeting. Thank you for your attendance.